Hello, everyone. Welcome back once again to Game Over Ottawa's off-season previews for the Senators. Maud and Charlie here. Once again, this time going to be discussing the forward group of the Ottawa Senators, what they should change and what they should keep the same for the upcoming season. Now, some of this, we will say, hinges on other moves to be made by the team. We think that the goaltending and defense is the most important, which is why we're doing the forwards last. And I'll say just right off the bat, depending on if Chikrin gets traded for an NHLer who has salary cap coming back, or if he is just traded for picks and prospects, clearing cap room, that will affect how much cap space we would have to potentially sign a forward. So we're going to be talking about a lot of free agent forward possibilities here. Some more possible than others, depending on the other moves that the team makes, depending on how much cap space they'll have available. But Charlie, who would be your number one concern in terms of the depth chart? Where do you think the Sens need to fill in a spot on the forward group?
It's tough because I do have to preface what I say with the fact that if everybody that is currently on the roster is healthy, it still feels like the team really needs a top six winger. If you're going to stick with a Kachuk, Stützle, Giroux top line, uh, I really do think that if you want to have solid depth, right, you need someone to play with Norris and Batherson to really fill that out because I think, having a third line of like a Greg, Pinto, Joseph third line would be great. But of course, this is all, within you have to deal with the cap constraints with it all. So, in a perfect world, if everyone's able to stay on the team and there is still room to bring in that player after you address just exactly like you said, the more important issues being goaltending and defense. In a perfect world, they can afford a solid second line winger. I don't know how likely that is. You might have to be bumping stuff around, so maybe you're more looking for a third liner to bump up there or something. I don't know. But I do think a lot of it also hinges on Josh Norris. I'm kind of at the point now where I'm genuinely concerned about his career.
Mm-hmm. Me
Um,
too.
so I don't know how that's going to go. And I don't want him to just be a number. Obviously, this is a human being who we're all cheering for as Sens fans and just like fans of hockey and sports in general. You should, be hoping that all these players who are going through, injury issues are going to come back and have a successful long career. Um, but with that being said, it's $8 million on the cap. It's a huge deal knowing whether he's going to start the season. Is he going to come back halfway through the season and throw a huge wrench in your cap calculations you've been doing heading into the offseason? So a lot of it hinges on, like we mentioned, fixing the goaltending, fixing the defense, and whether or not Josh Norris is going to play. But all that to say, ideally, in a perfect world, if they can address it, a second line winger would be perfect. I don't know how you feel about potentially bumping Pinto or Greg or someone up to that second line, maybe even Joseph if they hold on to him, um, and just focusing on a depth move. I'm not sure. How do you feel about that?
I totally agree about a second line winger. Maybe, if not that, because like you said, you could put Joseph, you could put Greg there, maybe. You could also, if Norris is healthy, you could slide Pinto up to the second line center, maybe, and try Norris on the wing. I would be interested in seeing that. But second line left wing and maybe a third line right wing, I think would be good too.
Mhm.
Again, depending on what happens with Joseph, because if you keep Joseph around and you get someone else to be a top six left wing, then Joseph could slide over to that right wing spot. So yeah, there's a lot depending on certain other moves, especially since it has been reported by Bruce Garrioch that Mathieu Joseph may be on the move. The team might be looking to dump his contract. He didn't say that he basically said that the Sens wouldn't be looking for a lot in return for Joseph, which to me sounds more like they would just want to get rid of his salary and not exactly do a player for player trade, which is really
Yeah.
interesting. I wanted to talk about a bit about Norris too, but since I'm on the topic of Joseph, how do you feel about that? Like, would you be okay with them moving on from Joseph, or do you think we really need to keep him?
I'm flip-flopping like crazy on him. Heading into last season, I really wanted them to move him just because of his cap hit. I like going into last season, I thought he is like the perfect the perfect fourth line or third liner, not second liner. He's either the perfect like fourth or third liner. Last year, I thought he was the perfect third liner. Through majority of the season, most of the season, he had such a hot start. All the Sens fans we started kind of made fun of ourselves for wanting him to be traded so much, kind of through the summer. Um, but I do have a couple checkpoints here through the season for Mathieu Joseph, just to give everyone an idea of his hot start. So he finished the season with 35 points through 72 games. Um, in the first 11 games, he had 11 points. By game 60, he had 35 points. So he had 0 points in the last 12 games of the season. Um, Now, I don't want to say that, that small sample size is what he is. I don't think he's the 0 points in 12 games guy. I also don't think he's the 11 points in 11 games guy who started the season, right? So, I do think that maybe 35 points in 72 games, you're just under half a point a game. I don't know if he's going to stick with that for the rest of his career. He's never been someone who scores like that ever before, and that's with a very, very hot start, right? So, I think I've kind of landed on my opinion on Mathieu Joseph is I think he is a fantastic defensive, like shutdown third line kind of player. I wish he was making closer to 2 rather than 3 per year against the cap. Not that 1 million makes a huge difference. Um, I guess it could with the Sens. The Sens being a cap team now, would probably like that extra million is some wiggle room that they could have. But um, if you do send out Mathieu Joseph and just try and get some picks and stuff back and just essentially get that cap space, that could be helpful. But then you have the issue of, being trying to replace a player. You're trading away Mathieu Joseph for cap space, and then you can try and bring in a player to take on Mathieu Joseph's role, and he's the perfect player for that role, if that makes sense. Um, and trying to find one cheaper than him. So I don't know, and I don't know if that's going to be possible, even though he is making about 3 million. And I mean, 3 million is probably about right for a third line winger who can put up a few points. But this is a very long-winded response just to say that I think he's probably not as good of a player as he was last year. Just going forward, I still think he's worth holding on to as long as he isn't the reason certain moves that need to get done don't get done. Just if it's a cap issue, then yeah, I'd probably ship him out. But you need to have like a really huge team altering deal that is being blocked by that extra couple of million that he's taking out.
It's tough when you try to evaluate a bottom six player's production because if you just look at the total of 35 points, I believe he played all 82 games, or no, he got injured for a bit. So
It
a little
was 72, I believe.
72. So it's a little bit, the points per game is a little bit better actually. But when you
Hmm.
look at that total, it's like, okay, if a bottom six forward is scoring, scoring a point, either a goal or assist once every 3 games or so, you think that's pretty good. But again, similar to the stats that you mentioned, his first 25 games was 19 points, which is like almost first line production. And then the last 47 games was 16 points, which is less points than the first 25. So when you look at that split, it's like, there's probably a good 30 games in that last 47 games where he didn't get any points at all. Um,
Yeah.
so that's tough. It's do you want to be still be paying 3 million for that? It's hard to say. It might just be that he had a huge hot streak at the beginning of last season and it's not repeatable. It could be because I think it is a career high in points for him overall. And I really
Yeah.
like the player. I'd
Should
like
be.
to think that he could improve on his point scoring even more just because his speed is such an asset. He can create a lot of chances for himself just off of that, but I don't think he's dynamic enough to necessarily have a huge production increase from what he already did last season. So it's tough. Like you said, if they're moving his cap to bring in like a top six forward to provide more offense, I'm not opposed to that. It's just that
Hmm.
his speed and his defensive ability and the penalty kill as well is tough to replace.
Exactly.
I'm not sure how they would replace that if they did move him out. They would probably need to get creative with free agency and find some cheap like $1 million contracts who can kill penalties.
Yeah. That's the whole other thing too, is I didn't even think about the fact that with his speed, I don't know how many scoring chances he either has himself or creates on the penalty kill, but it's got to be up there with the top of the league.
It's a lot.
He's something else. He's so fast, and that's the thing too. Like if I still think like at 3 million, I think he's the perfect third line winger who you can lean on for your PK. I really like him as a player. Even if he goes forward with like a if he scores 30 points per 82 going forward through the rest of his career, something like that, 25-30, it's a 3 million's a lot. But with his capability defensively, which this team is kind of lacking in most areas, I think he's such an important part of the team. And I mean, I'm leaning towards keeping him unless, like, for some reason we think he's going to have a completely horrible and fall off in every way next season. I don't think it's possible that he scores that many points. I think he's got to score a few, like, fewer points. I think he'll probably score, if he stays healthy, probably 25-30 points if he plays about 80 games. But it's just that his ability on the PK is so important. Um, I'm leaning towards keeping him, but again, the cap issues with this team, easier said than done. It all depends on what they pay Pinto and what they pay Branstrom if Branstrom comes back, how they address it all goes back to goaltending and defense, really, like we said. Like a lot of these things that we're talking about here are completely based on um different moves that they could make for the more important positions. Because like as much as it would be great to bring in a top six forward, fixing the goaltending and defense is so much more important.
Yeah, I lean towards keeping him too, specifically for the speed and defensive ability. It's tough though. So many decisions to be made. It's in I'll put it this way, it's in the scenario that if I was in control, I would try to keep him and try to improve the team as much while still keeping him on our third line because I think he just
Hmm.
has unique abilities that other players on this team don't. But Steos might have a bigger vision. He might have bigger names that he wants to bring in and might need a little bit more cap space to do that. So if they move out Joseph and end up signing some bigger contracts, I can probably live with it. It's
Hmm.
it's just it's a really tricky one because I think he's a bit of a fan favorite. I think people would be sad to see him go, as a person too. Everyone really likes him, so it's a tough one. But if it brings in, if it clears enough cap space to bring in a top six forward, it could end up being a good move. And if the Sens were to try to sign a top six forward in free agency, who is your top choice, Charlie?
My top choice that will not happen because I can't imagine the Sens being able to afford him, and I also kind of imagine him being re-signed by his current team. We've already talked about this team if you've checked out the defense episode. But and this is also very biased, I will say, because I grew up watching this player play for the 67s a whole lot, but my top choice would be Tyler Toffoli. And I don't think he fits in with the cap. I think he fits in very well with the build of this team. I think a second line, fingers crossed, Josh Norris stays healthy. If you can have a Toffoli, Norris, Batherson second line, I think that's amazing. But also to your point, I do want to acknowledge the fact that you had a really good point of, maybe putting Pinto on the second line, moving Norris to the wing, and then all of a sudden now you just have a third line hole to fill, which would be a lot more affordable. I think that's a lot easier. Probably, honestly, probably the better move for the team as a whole. But I still want to play this fun game of imagining Tyler Toffoli on the Sens. He was on that really, really strong 67s team with like Monahan, CC, Mrazek, like that. They went pretty deep in the playoffs one year, and that was
Mm-hmm.
that was a lot of fun. So there's a lot of bias there, but
And it really depends on if
yeah.
the team thinks that Josh Norris could be a good winger, or if they're even considering it at all. They
Yeah.
might they might just like his game at center and want to keep him there. In which case, then the need does become a winger. If you could shift him over, it's a bit of like video game logic where if I'm playing EA Sports GM mode, I'll just throw him on the wing as a center and be like, it doesn't matter, it will work just fine. Whereas in
Yeah.
real life, the player may have more difficulty adjusting to a different position. So it's
Yeah.
probably
And,
not
and we
something
know,
it's probably not something they would plan around doing in the off season. But I will say
oh,
on the
not.
topic of Norris that you definitely have to plan for him to be healthy. Even if he is injured, you can't really spend any of that LTIR cap space unless you really think that he's going to be out for the whole season because then you got to deal
Yeah.
with it in the middle of the year, which is tough.
Exactly. And as far as moving Norris to the wing goes, like it's tough to know over the last couple of seasons just because of the injury issues. But if you go back to his 40 goal season, just watching the highlights from that, he like as much as we all know he's got a great shot, he loves parking himself in front of the net and just shoveling in rebounds and getting pucks in just like that. So if you put him on the wing, you're gonna have to find a center who loves to float around the sides because Norris is gonna be the guy that you're probably gonna want to park in front of the net. So it might be a weird thing where like, maybe most of the time he's playing like a center, but maybe, and I don't know, maybe part of it has to do with his shoulder that maybe the team's going to be afraid of him taking faceoffs
Yeah,
going
that's a good
forward.
point. Yeah.
So I don't know. I like the idea, um, but I still think that regardless of whether you start him on the wing, on the shift, or at center, he's still probably going to be playing a lot like a center.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I really do like that idea of yours though. So anyway, that's my fantasy land send
Yeah,
sign.
to Foley.
A
So
Yeah,
I have him. I wrote down some forwards. I made some notes. I picked two guys that I think are fairly likely for the Sens to be able to sign, two guys that I think are kind of unlikely, and two guys that I think
yeah,
are not quite top six forwards, but we might end up with them anyway. And I had Toffoli in the more unlikely category just because with potential moves for goaltending and defense, bringing in probably more money at those positions, I would expect Toffoli to make somewhere between like 5 to 6 million at least.
yeah.
And
I'm imagining six.
yeah, so if you can fit Toffoli in on $6 million on this team, that would be awesome. But I think it might be
That's
tough.
tough. That's
Mostly,
tough.
mostly because any goaltending move that you make, unless you go like, really risky, any goaltending move that you make is going to be an increase in cap. Pretty
Yeah,
much all of the goalies we talked about in our goaltending episode make more money than Eunice Corpusalo does. So that makes it
yeah,
difficult. So I don't know how much money is going to be available for a forward as sort of being the lowest priority to fix this offseason, but Toffoli would be a pipe dream. I would be super
yeah.
happy with that
And
if
I think this is also a time when Toffoli's going to be signing as big a contract as he can because
yes.
he's been underpaid his whole career.
Mhm.
His
Wasn't he
highest
making like
cap hit
3 mil in Calgary?
in Calgary,
He was making not much, I think, which is crazy.
Calgary. I guess Calgary. He would have been on his Habs contract, right?
Oh, maybe it was the Habs contract that was
Because
kind of
his
cheap.
highest cap hit ever was 4.6 for 3 years.
That's insane.
His most recent, the team, the contract he signed with the Habs, it was 4.25 for 4 years. So
He
he's never
way
made more than
outperformed that too.
4.6.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
absolutely he did.
super
So
underpaid.
he's going to be looking for the big payday. He's been underpaid his whole career.
Hmm. Yeah. So he would be a good choice for the Sens, but because of that factor of
Yeah, he
being
doesn't
underpaid
fit,
for
but
his whole
I
career, it
had to bring him up.
he might be going somewhere else to a team with tons of cap space that can just give him 6.5 million, something like that. So
You
it's a
know
tough
what?
one.
And the problem is that the first team that comes to mind is
Is
Boston.
Boston? Yeah, do you want to get into that? We might as well get into Boston because my pick for a winger to bring in to this team is Jake DeBrusk. The thing with Boston is that they have somehow 21 million of cap space and they don't have too many important contracts to sign. They have to sign Jeremy Swayman, which will be expensive, but they can also move Linus Olmark and just save all the
To
money
Ottawa,
right there.
please.
Yeah, yeah, hopefully to Ottawa, but even after making those goalie moves, since extending Swayman, they'll still have a ton of cap space, and the only really important players to sign are DeBrusk and Grzelcyk. So maybe they'll re-sign DeBrusk, but I feel like DeBrusk has always been in trade rumors for like the past 3
Yeah,
years.
like
Whether
on and
it's
off.
whether it's a divide between him and the leadership or the coaching or the management or something, it's just never really been like, oh, we really want to sign this guy long term. So I could see Boston potentially letting him go and big game hunting in free agency because if you sign Swayman to like 6 or 7 million, you get rid of Olmark to save 5 million. That almost offsets. It's just a little bit
Yeah,
more money, and then sign Grzelcyk for 3 to 4 million, whatever. You will still have like between 10 to 15 million left. They could go out and sign a top forward. I wouldn't be surprised if Boston is going after Stamkos if he's available, Marchessault if he's available, maybe Gensel if he makes it to free agency, or even Toffoli like you mentioned. That was the
yeah,
segue to get us here to Boston is I could see Boston deciding to go for a more expensive top six forward rather than Jake DeBrusk, and that leaves him out on the open market. But I still really like him as a player. He was already making $4 million, but
Yeah.
he had a decrease in production this year. He was 19 goals, so not quite 20 goals, and 40 points, which is still good. And the year before that, though, he was like 55, 53 points or something like that, and he had considerably more goals. So he does have a bit more potential to be higher production than what we saw last year. Just because he didn't do it last year makes me think that he won't be earning a huge raise in free agency. He made 4
Yeah.
million, and I'm thinking you could sign him for like 4.5 or 5 million maybe on a 3 to 4 year deal. I would be
Yeah.
very happy with that. He can play left wing, he can play right wing, he can play on your second line, your third line, maybe fill in on first line if you have injuries. I think he'd be a really good pickup.
Yeah, he's also on my list. And yeah, and it's entirely possible that, maybe things are going to be okay between him and Boston again for some reason, because it just keeps going back and forth. He demands a trade. Actually, no, it's cool. He'd like a trade again. No, it's all right, actually. So I could see him signing with Boston, and I could see Boston still having the cap space to go and get a huge name as well. That's going to be an issue. But yeah, no, I think realistically, he probably is a better fit than Toffoli for the Sens. Realistically, just a bit more, he'd be a bit more affordable. I imagine Toffoli's gonna be getting 6 per year. I could see DeBrusk signing somewhere for without even a raise. I could see him signing for 4 just because some injury issues in the past, didn't have a great season last year. Um, Production wise, he's not that far off from like weirdly enough, he's pretty close to like Shane Pinto's rookie season uh last year in terms of um production. So just to give not to compare the players, but more so to compare where they would fit in the lineup, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah,
Pinto, I can see Pinto as a really strong third liner, or like if you need him on the second line, I think that's doable. DeBrusque kind of fits that same role for me. He's got like the higher upside, I think, but he'd be a great fit on the second line. And like if necessary, you could play him on the third or even the first. Like he's got that. He's
he's
he's got some
versatile.
flexibility. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. He can play, and he can play, yeah, either side. I'm pretty sure he can play either wing, right? He's played on both sides, so very, very versatile player.
If you want to talk for a little bit longer, I want to quickly find out whether or not he kills penalties. I want to
There you go. Yeah, let's see that, and then we're gonna
because
see that he does, and then he's gonna be more expensive than we thought.
I feel like we were just talking about Joseph and that penalty killing ability.
Yeah, yeah, that's a
Wondering
good point.
if we could
Absolutely.
replace that. I feel like I have seen DeBrusque on Boston's penalty kill, but I don't know for sure, so I want to fact check myself real quick.
Yeah, let's figure that out. While you're doing that, another thing to keep in mind with DeBrusque, yeah, so he's coming off a 2-year contract, 4 million per. Um, I imagine he's going to stay in that area. He'd be more affordable for the Sens if he stays around 4.5. And again, I'm just going to keep repeating myself throughout this whole episode. And this is all obviously based on what's the cap space going to look like after they address goaltending, after they address defense, which hopefully they do first. I hope, if we see a big splash that's being made, it's going to be, for an upgrade on goaltending, an upgrade on defense, rather than an upgrade at forward. And then you're kind of like, okay, now they have to fix the defense and the goaltending. They have 2 million in cap space. What the hell's going on? Um,
Yeah,
but
like
yeah,
that's why I'm looking at the more mid-level signings for forwards, and I think DeBrusque fits that perfectly. And
yeah.
he kills penalties.
Okay,
Look
so
at
he's
that.
gonna be more than 4. He's gonna be 5, probably, eh? Like
Yeah,
with that.
I guess, but you have to remember that that penalty killing is already factored into what he is. Like
That's fair.
it's some
Yeah,
new
yeah, yeah.
information that we just learned, but also everyone already knows that. But yeah, I would say probably around 5 million or so. For the penalty kill, he had a minute 36 of shorthanded time on ice per game, and total minutes in the regular season was 128 minutes on the penalty kill. Which is the third most of Bruins forwards, behind
There you go.
Marchand and
Okay,
Coyle.
so
So that's another element that he would bring to the Sens as well. And if you're moving Joseph, slide DeBrusque in on the penalty kill.
if DeBrusque is coming in, I am suddenly so much more open to moving Joseph
Yeah,
with that point. Yeah.
I may have just discovered that fact right now, but it's a good point.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. Wow. All right. Well, should I bring up a player that I know is on both of our lists?
Do it.
If we're good on DeBrusque, I believe we both have Teravainen on our list of like probably won't happen, but would be nice.
Mm-hmm. I like him quite a bit.
Yeah, with Carolina, because Carolina, we've talked about Carolina quite a bit just with the defense as well. They have a good amount of cap space available, but they have a lot of players to sign. They're going to sign Gensel, probably. They're going to probably sign one of Pesci or Shea, and they should have a little bit left over. They got to sign Jarvis. They got to sign Martin Necas if they don't want to move his rights. So someone's going to have to go, and it might be one of Pesci or Shea, and then Teravainen, just because they have to have room somewhere in there. Teravainen plays both sides, plays both wings, and last season, 25 goals, 53 points in 76 games. And he's been right around there, if not better, for most of his career. So I do think he's going to be more expensive than DeBrusque, maybe even more expensive than Toffoli, honestly.
Yeah, potentially. Toffoli's more of a goal
So
scorer, though, so I think
yeah,
that might get him paid more.
that's true. That's true.
You know what? And you know what I just looked up about Teravainen because it was one click away from what I checked
Does
about
he kill
DeBrusque. Is
penalties?
he kills penalties and he's fourth ranked amongst the Canes forwards and he has almost the exact same total minutes on the penalty kill as DeBrusque. So either of them could come in and kill penalties, and they are both good at it because those are two fantastic defensive teams in Boston and Carolina.
Yeah. So that rounds out my list of like would love probably won't happen just because of cap issues with this team in
Yeah,
Ottawa.
that's how I rank them
Um,
too.
but they would all be so fun, and I think they would all fit very well.
I think
Um,
Teravainen is a really interesting one to me because he's coming off a contract that paid him 5.4 million, or at least that was the cap hit.
yeah,
And I don't know if he's earned a raise. I think he had a really good contract year this season with the 25 goals, 53 points. Last
yeah,
season he had a down year with less than 20 goals and it was less than 40 points. I think he had an injury in there too, less games played, but like last year he definitely didn't earn a raise. This year maybe, but it's like will he consistently perform as he did this year? I don't know. So like I don't really think he'll get a raise, but I think he'd probably sign at about a similar amount. I think a little more than DeBrusque.
yeah,
I would expect him to be at about the same cap hit that he's already making, maybe a little bit more, maybe like 5.75 or something, which would be tough for the Sens to fit in. It's a little too much. Like maybe we can fit DeBrusque at 5, but the way that I was mapping that out was also with paying 5 million to a right-handed D and paying I think 4.5 for DeBrusque, and then the Sens were at like 500k cap space remaining. So it's going to be really tight if we want to make lots of
right,
additions.
yeah, yeah. It's gonna be really tough. Do you want to get into some if you have any some depth ideas? I have two, and I'm not like thrilled with either of them, but I guess that's just kind of the general feeling with depth players, right? You're not supposed to be super psyched on them. That's why they're affordable.
Yeah, so I wrote down some depth guys who could be like fourth liners, but I also have a couple of other depth top six kind of guys who
Okay, yeah.
they're not really top six forwards, they're more third liners, but if we can't get anyone else, I think they would be good additions.
Yeah,
Uh
hit me with those before I go into my fourth liners. Yeah.
sure. So the other player that I put as I think semi likely that we could sign him is Daniel Sprong. 43 points
Right.
in 76 games for Detroit, making only 2 million last year, so he'll get a raise for sure. I don't think he has much of a defensive element to his game, so he's probably gonna be 3.5, maybe 4 million if you sign him. I think somewhere in that 3 million range. I think he's a guy that can score, but isn't necessarily the best well-rounded 200-foot game type player.
Hmm.
But if we want someone to put the puck in the net a little bit more, some depth goal scoring, I think that's a guy that we could pick up for a little bit cheaper. Potentially
Yeah,
Detroit could re-sign him too, though, because Detroit doesn't have any problems with cap.
that's true. Yeah.
But I think that's a decent option. And then the other guys that I wrote down was Jason Zucker. Definitely not a top six forward, but 32 points in 69 games, and he made 5.3 million previously, so he's due for a pay cut. He's not
Yeah.
really a top six forward anymore, but I think he's a good third or fourth liner. So if you could get him in the 2 million range, I think that would be a good addition. He can kind of move up and down the lineup. I'd be cool with that. And also Danton Heinen, he was making league minimum and got 36 points in 74 games. That could be a guy that Boston just keeps, like we said, with their ample amount of cap space. But
Yeah.
that's probably a guy that you could get for like 2 million or less and move up and down the lineup too.
I like those. Yeah, I like those options quite a bit. Obviously, and just like any other conversation that we have, right? It's all about the money when it comes to free agents. I'd be happy with most NHLers on Ottawa. It all just depends on the price, right? So I think, yeah, if you're kind of signing those guys like a two or three, um, that could really help out that third line, especially if, you know, because my main concern with moving Joseph was what happens to the third line. If you're moving Joseph to make room for that top six winger, then you replace, that hole that's suddenly there on the third line with someone like that. I think it could be really effective for the Sens. I think that's I like both. I like both those names quite a bit.
It's also possible that if you don't sign someone in the 4 and 5 million range, like Toffoli, Terrain, and DeBrusque, you could get like two guys. Like you could get Sprong 2.5
Yeah,
million, Zucker 2 million, or something like that, and then that's pretty good depth.
yeah. That also completely, yeah, that really fixes the depth problem as well.
Who did
Um,
you have for depth?
For depth, I have two skaters who are purely defense. Like they're really not going to put up any points. Or they might, but it probably wouldn't be too many. The first one that I have is Craig Smith, who is currently a UFA with Dallas. Did not have very many points this season. He had 20 points in 75 games, but by all the metrics I've been looking at, really, really solid defensively as well. Bit of a down year this year as well defensively, but was only 1 mil on the cap. He's probably going to get paid pretty close to the same. So if you're looking for a guy to purely play on the second PK and feel like you can put out a player who's not going to get caved in on the fourth line, playing against the other team's fourth or third line, um, I think he's a decent enough option. Again, it's tough finding those fourth liners that aren't going to be problems, and I do think that he can be a pretty decent cheap option on the fourth line.
Yeah, I like that. Super cheap is the type of contract where you probably can't really go wrong with him. Um, I like that for sure. Did you have another one too?
I do have one more, and this is going to be a big pay cut
Oh
potentially.
yeah.
Uh, this is a player that I would want on the fourth line, maybe the third line if there's some injuries, but it's a big pay cut. He was making 4.5 this past season. The player I have in mind is Alex Wenberg. Another
Okay.
instance of really strong defensive play. He put up a few points this season. He put up 25 points in 60 games with Seattle before being traded to the Rangers, where he put up 5 in 19. So kind of a similar scoring touch to Mathieu Joseph as if you're looking at the season as a whole. Really strong defensively. But again, if he's looking to make about the same amount of money he was on with this expiring contract, absolutely not, since he was making 4.5, which he signed. It was with Seattle. He signed a 3-year, 4.5 deal. And that was after. Well, he actually started out that contract really well, 37 points, 38 points,
Yeah,
and then 30 points this past
I think
season.
Columbus played him in their top six before Seattle picked him up, and then it made him look better. It made him look better than
Yeah,
he was.
yeah. Florida, you know what it is. Florida had him 29
Oh,
points,
he was on
56 games,
Florida, right?
17 goals. So he actually upped his scoring, not his goal scoring, but he upped his points totals for the first two seasons with Seattle. But I mean, if you're looking at him as purely, like a defense, if you're trying to recreate Joseph, I
Oh
think
yeah,
Wenberg is a really good option who probably shouldn't be making more than what Joseph is making now.
that
So
makes
if you're
sense.
looking at an option to replace Joseph, ideally you're paying that player 2.5. I think Wenberg is a pretty good option for that. If you're planning on moving Joseph, if not, you probably don't need Wenberg and you want to get those really cheap contracts coming in and just hopefully you can fit in that, ideally, a top end third liner or like sort of like a lower end second line winger that you can put there on that second line. But as far as like if you're going to move out Joseph and try and bring someone in on a lower contract, I think Wenberg is a pretty decent option there. Even if you're just banking on him being strong defensively and hopefully, not putting too much pressure on him to score. I like him as a third liner, maybe even fourth liner if you need it. But
Yeah, I like that too. I remember when Columbus drafted him, and I thought he was gonna be like a playmaking top six center. I thought he was gonna be the new Jason Spezza. Not quite, but you're right that he has a well-rounded defensive game, so you would be bringing him in for that.
exactly, yeah.
Definitely worth it for that if you can get him for relatively cheap. Because like you said, it should be a pay cut. You can't justify 4 million plus for a guy who you're bringing in for his
No.
defense as a forward. So yeah,
Yeah.
I wouldn't be opposed to that if the Sens had room to bring him in for like two something. I think that would be good.
Yeah. It'd be part of like a multi like level move, right? Like I like
Yeah.
your idea of like you move out Joseph to make room for a guy like DeBrusque to play on the top PK and on the second line. Then that gives you a bit more wiggle room. Spend 2.5 on Wenberg. Like I think it fits, but it's such a specific scenario where I'm happy with him on the Sens, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But
The depth guys that I wrote down. Um, I'll start with Kevin Stenlund. He is not really very well known, but he's playing in the Cup Finals for the Panthers right now in their fourth line. Fourth line center. He's very big, got the size. He's got a hard shot, surprisingly. He had 11 goals in the regular season, only 15 points, but this is a guy who's making $1 million, and that's probably about what you would sign him for on his next contract, too. Just the fact that he is the fourth line center for the team that is probably going to win the Cup. At this point of when we're recording this, the Florida
yeah,
Panthers are up 2-0. Game 3 is tonight, so Stanley Cup potential winning fourth line center. I wouldn't be mad at bringing that in. Sam
yep,
Lafferty, I've liked him on the Canucks when I watched Canucks this year. 24
yep.
points, a little bit more for a fourth liner, made 1.1 million, so maybe he would get a bit of a raise, but not too much. He would definitely be less than $2 million. He can play right wing, he can play center. Those are just the versatile guys you want to have in your bottom six. I also like Yakov Trenin. He's really big as well. He's a huge guy throwing the body around out there. He had 12 goals as a bottom six forward this year. He made 1.7 million, which I would think he would get a slight pay cut from that, but somewhere near 1.5 million, maybe a little less. He's a
Mhm.
left wing that can also play center as well. And then the one really out there kind of buy low option that I wrote down is Barabanov. He can play right wing or left wing. He only had 13 points in 46 games and was really bad plus minus on the Sharks, but everyone was. The thing is,
Yeah.
the year before that, he had 47 points in 68. So he showed a little bit of top six capability again on a
Mhm.
bad team. He was making 2.5 million since he had such a bad year. I feel like you could get him for like 1 mil or less and try him on your third line. See if he's that much of a disaster defensively when he moves to a different team and maybe can provide some of that offense that he did 2 seasons ago. I kind of like him as a buy low candidate if we don't have a lot of money to spend on an offensive upgrade. He has a little bit of bounce back potential to be able to produce a little bit.
I like it. Yeah. Solid picks.
Yeah, not too much to say about most of those guys beyond like a little blurb,
Yeah.
but if we sign any of those guys that you mentioned or that I mentioned to cheap deals, obviously not overpaying, they would be good. It's
Yeah.
a bunch of guys who are better than Kastelik, better than McEwen, better than a couple other guys that we have playing bottom six lately, so they would be upgrades.
Definitely. Yeah. Um, all that to say again, let's hope they address goaltending and defense
Yep,
first.
exactly. There's a reason why we did this video last out of all the positions.
Yeah.
But yeah, that probably does it for this one. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Reminder to subscribe if you are not already. We will be having more Sens content coming this offseason, especially once the team starts actually making moves, post-draft, post-free agency, any trades that happen. We'll try to get some reactions out for those. So there is plenty more content to come.
Absolutely. Stay tuned. It's gonna be it's all bangers. It's all gonna be really they're all gonna be really good. They're every single video must see
Bangers only.
YouTube, I guess. Yeah.
Game over!